Hı.
Şuradan esece üstüne aşağıdan. Şuraya giriyorsun.
Bir şey yapmadık.
Bu yapacaksın. Sonra diğerine geçiyorsun. Bundan
Ha.
bunu yapıyorsun.
Sen,
Öyle var değil mi?
Biz oradan ayarlayacağız onu.
Evet evet.
Ekranı değiştireceğiz.
Yoluna
ben sadece bunu yapacağım yani.
Evet.
Aynen. Bu zaten full screen'de kalsın şimdi.
Aynen.
Sen şimdi
Tamam, bunu küçültüp diğerine geçip büyütüp.
aynen.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the very last session of the conference. I'm Noyan Dokudan, and I'm your chair. And I'm very honored to be here because I was one of the first organizers of this conference back in 2018. It used to be called Booster. And I'm so glad to see that the conference is still being held. That's why I would like to thank the organizing committee of this year and all the participants. Thank you. The first talk of this session is titled A Nanosyntactic Decomposition of Turkish Z Paradigm Affixes by Ayşe Feyza Gök.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here. My presentation centers on Turkish Z paradigm affixes. More precisely, I'm going to be sharing with you the nanosyntactic analysis I've built concerning these affixes. The presentation itself comprises of three main sections. First, I'm going to be talking a little about what I mean by Z paradigm affixes and why exactly they are a point of interest to me. Secondly, I'm going to be walking you through the basics of the nanosyntactic framework and how its lexicalization algorithm operates. And then once we have cleared these steps, I will then move on to explain how my analysis works within the framework step by step. So without further ado, let's proceed. First, I want to give you some info on the typology of Turkish. It's an agglutinative language, which means that affixes play a big role in word and word form formation. And that includes verbs as well. Take, for example, the Turkish verb stem gel here, which translates to come. And by simply suffixating it with D, the past tense suffix, it turns into geldi, which translates to she came or he came. Note that I have marked the grammatical subject here as optional. That is because in Turkish we have, like as you see here, we have agreement marking suffixes as well. So in sen geldin, N is the second person singular marker. So when someone is speaking Turkish and they omit the subject, it's always unambiguous, almost always. So what you see here is the full conjugation paradigm for gel in the past tense. As you can see, the person and number are mostly denoted by a single morpheme. And an interesting fact about Turkish is that these person number marking suffixes vary depending on tense. For example, if we were to conjugate gel in the present tense, this is also the imperfective aspect marker in Turkish, you'll note that the agreement marking suffixes change according to the tense. So if we were to If we are to isolate these suffixes from these two paradigms, they end up looking like this. The suffixes on the left belong to the K paradigm, and the ones on the right are the Z paradigm. And I'm going to be focusing on the latter because they present an interesting case of syncretism in the second person plural and first person plural. Let us take a closer look at the Z paradigm. Only the first person and second persons get marked overtly, whereas the third person seems to be represented by a null morpheme in the singular. With the plurals, things get a bit more interesting. I have talked about the syncretism seen here. Sinus turns into is, where, so if we are to assume a null morpheme here, things are getting a bit complex because it makes more sense for us to denote both plural and the person features than for the sun's absence to mark person. Also, null morphemes, while they present us with an easy explanation for the syncretism we see here, they are in an inelegant explanation, and we don't want them in a theoretical standpoint. So how do we explain the syncretism if we aren't going to assume null morphemes? Well, the nanosyntactic framework offers a pretty neat explanation for cases of syncretism thanks to its lexicalization algorithm. So how exactly does this framework work really? Nanosyntax is a relatively novel approach to morphology, which helps regularize a lot of the seemingly irregular morphology we absorb in language. It can also offer an explanation for the variety we see between languages. This is because of the relation nanosyntax paints between syntax and lexicon. Stark argues that the building blocks of language are actually much smaller than morphemes. In fact, they are very much submorphemic. The presupposition is that a lexicon, being specific to each language, is preceded by syntax, which is standard in every language. Lexicon consists of lexical entries, and whose internal structures are represented by syntactic trees in the lexicon, such as these you see. The one on the left is an entry I have built myself. This is very simple, but it would get more complex. It's a very rough representation. At the very bottom is, you see, branching, and we have the semantic essence, as you would put it. And on top of that, I have put a nominalizer feature. And at the very top of it, I have put a nominative feature, which spells out as cat, let's say. And on the right is the pluralizer suffix, s in English, which includes a singular ending, a terminal node, a single terminal node at the very bottom, different to the one on the left, because the content words tend to have branching entries because of the semantic representation at the very bottom, the verb root in a square root. And the morphemes, such as suffixes, affixes, stuff like that, are represented by a terminal node, a singular terminal node at the very bottom. So, take, for example, this very simplified tree of Turkish verb yap. It consists of three features. At the very bottom is ris, which is short for result. It represents a result state in words. And at the top of that is prosp. It's short for process, which represents change through time. And at the very top is init, which is short for initiation, and it represents an initiational state that leads to the process. This naturally arises the question, if every terminal node corresponds to a singular feature, how exactly do we know how to order them? Or how do we know how to order the features? How do we build the syntactic tree of a lexical entry? The ordering of trees is in fact not arbitrary, and it is computed by the functional sequence in a hierarchical fashion. The functional sequence, FSEC for short, indicates the order in which each feature is lexicalized, and there are different variations of it for different purposes. This one I'm using right here is for verbs, for example. And you will see at the very bottom that I have compressed result process and initiation into init-p because they won't be much relevant for my derivational process. Init-p is already contained within the verb root itself. And following init-p is aspect, and on top of that is mood, with an additional indicative feature on top of mood. So that's because subjunctive mood is described as an impoverished version of indicative by Stark. So the absence of indicative feature would translate into subjunctive, for example. And on top of indicative, we have the tense feature, followed by the number feature, which is followed by the plural and the agreement markers, agreement features on top. The third person, second person, and first person. We would call these person, participant, and the speaker, respectively. Again, these features are ordered from the least marked to the most. It is also a rule that during the derivational process, the lexicalization process, features on the FSEC cannot be skipped. For example, you can't skip the number feature and just attach plural to a structure. It's not allowed. If you want to build second person, you have to include the third person in that. Or if you want to build the first person feature, that is the speaker, you have to have participant and the person features because a speaker will also be a participant in the conversation and it will also be a person. Another thing to keep in mind is that these features are merged one by one in accordance with their position in the hierarchy and through the syntactic operations proposed by Stark. The algorithm itself consists of 4 basic steps, which I will be explaining in order. The first step is, so you have a feature, what you do with it is you merge it and try to lexicalize. And by lexicalize, I mean you check the lexicon and see if there are any matching entries. So for example, you have XP, your root, whatever, and you want to lexicalize FP. So what you do first is, as you see in 7P, you attach it on top and you check your lexicon to see if this can be lexicalized. If there's nothing that matches this entry in the lexicon, you move on to the next step. If you fail, evacuate the closest labeled non-random constituent and lexicalize FP. So we try to merge FP, it doesn't work. So we evacuate XP and we move it to the specified position, and then we check for the lexicon and see if there are any matching entries for FP, that entries that end in FP. If that also fails, we try to merge FP right here. It didn't work, so we evacuated XP and we checked the lexicon. We don't see any entries that match, so we move the dominating node, the mother node of that, and we check the lexicon for entries that match. That was the lexicalization algorithm. And if these all fail, you have to backtrack into the previous cycle. And in that cycle, whatever step allowed you to lexicalize, you apply the step that follows after that. All right. There are also 2 core principles that govern the lexicalization algorithm and the derivational process. The first one is the superset principle. A lexically stored tree L can lexicalize the structure as built in the syntax if and only if L contains S as a subtree. So you have your entry L on the very left, and you have 11B, and you see that F2P is able to be lexicalized as L even though it doesn't have F3P in it, because F2P is a subtree of the entry, so it can be lexicalized. On the other hand, you have 11C, which cannot be lexicalized as L because L doesn't have F4 in it. And then we have the elsewhere principle. If there are 2 matching entries for a feature in the lexicon, the feature is lexicalized by the more specific entry with less features. So you have L1 and L2 entries right here. and one of them is smaller than the other, but they both have the same ending. So they are both candidates to lexicalize F1P. But the one that will be lexicalized is L2 because it has less features, hence it is more specific. So those were the rules that I'm going to follow, and we can move on to our analysis. This is my lexicalization table for the Turkish verb yap in the present tense. As you can see, the third person singular, being the most bare form, presents us with the initial clue as to the inner structure of ior. That is to say, if we aren't assuming the existence of null morphemes, ior has to include everything except for the ones in init P. So everything from aspect, mood, and indicative tense, everything has to be lexicalized by ior. That would also explain the absence of a third person marker. Sun would consist of second person. Well, we could assume that since your lexicalizes everything up there, and the only thing left for 2P to lexicalize is to be lexicalized by Sun. But if Sun were to only contain 2P, that would present a problem. It would be kind of problematic because if you look at the plural paradigm, we see that Sun is preceding the plural marker, even though the plural marker comes before the agreement suffixes. Plural feature precedes the agreement suffixes. So you would expect not yapıyorsunuz, but yapıyoruzsun, which doesn't make sense. So I assume Sun has a bigger tree, a more complex inner structure, and it would actually go down to tens because you had seen in the K and Z paradigm dichotomy that it exists because of the different tense usages. So the third person singular is quite simple. It would also start at tens, and we would merge 1P at the top of it, so it could override the entry of Sun. It would replace Sun, basically. The plural forms follow in a similar fashion to the singulars, except that the third person form includes a pluralizer. This pluralizer doesn't change across the paradigms, so I assume that it doesn't include tense. It is more specific. It only lexicalizes plural and third person. With the second person plural, we again see Sun, followed by Uz. If you remember, Sun had tense as its bottommost feature. This is also the case here. Only it cannot lexicalize all of its features this time because of the interfering Uz suffix. This shouldn't present a problem, however, seeing as the superset principle allows Sun to surface as long as it can lexicalize one of its subtrees. So tense P on its own is enough to lexicalize Sun. For Uz, I assume that it goes all the way down to the number. This should trigger a series of backtracking movements that will ultimately help Sun to surface. So lastly, we have first person plural, where Uz lexicalizes tense and everything that follows after it. It seems to kind of devour Sun here, like it devours both itself and Sun. So we know that it's possible for a single morpheme to override two morphemes. It is attested in other languages like Spanish verb conjugation paradigms or Freudian verbs. So how can a morpheme override itself, really? Let us take a closer look. Assume for a second that the syncretism isn't present and the two versions of Uz we see in this paradigm are actually two different morphemes. Let's call them Uz1 and Uz2, respectively. The inner structure of Uz2 has to be such that when we evacuate yapıyor, when we remove everything like yap and yor, everything that is left has to lexicalize as Uz. Like this. So Sun plus Uz1 and 1P should equal Uz2. This means that Uz2 has Sun1, Sun and Uz1 as its subtrees. How do we combine these two entries into one entry? A branching entry such as this is able to answer our question. It's important to note that the lexical trees should be generated through syntactic movements that are possible. Here in this tree, TP was moved out from the bottom into the specifier position right here. And then 1P was merged directly on top. You'll notice that the entry includes two subtrees. One of the subtrees is TP on the left, which can also lexicalize as sun. The subtree on the right side lexicalizes as uz2. And with 1P, the whole structure is lexicalized as uz1. And this is the full functional lexicon of all, including all the morphemes you see in the paradigm. You'll notice that I have also made use of a complex entry for yor, the present tense suffix. This is to make sure sun surfaces when we're trying to derive yapıyorsunuz. Due to my limited time, I will only be providing the audience with the derivation of the plurals. So let's get started. You'll remember our FSEC from earlier, and our verb root yap also already lexicalizes init p, everything up to init p. So we start our derivation with init p. This is yap. And the first feature we have to lexicalize is aspect. So what we do, according to the lexicalization algorithm, is merge aspect and try to lexicalize. This obviously fails. There's no entry that looks like this in the lexicon. So we move on to the next step, which is to evacuate yap and try to lexicalize. Now this is able to be lexicalized, seeing as your ends in aspect. So due to the superset principle, this is able to be lexicalized as yapıyor. So this is successfully. And we move on to our next cycle, next feature, which is mood. Mood is also lexicalized by the same method, evacuating init p. And indicative is also lexicalized through the same thing. This whole thing on the right, this whole branch on the right is a subtree of the entry of yor. So our next feature is TP, which is tense. Merging it doesn't work. I haven't included here, but it doesn't work. Evacuating init p doesn't work, so we try the next step, which is to move the whole thing and have TP at the very right here. So we were trying to derive yapıyorlar, but we ended up with yapıyorsun. That's weird, but it's okay, because the derivation isn't over until we have lexicalized all the features that need to be lexicalized. So we keep going. This is intermediary. We merge a number feature, doesn't work. We evacuate initiation P, and we try to lexicalize, and as you can see, this is a subtree of the entry of yor. So it can be lexicalized, and soon goes away. So we keep going. The next feature is plural. To lexicalize plural, we will have to evacuate the whole structure, and we will get yapıyorlar thanks to the superset principle. Plural P on its own is able to be lexicalized as lar. And the last feature to lexicalize to end the derivation of yapıyorlar is to merge 3P and lexicalize it by evacuating the mother node of init P. And this is yapıyorlar, the tree of yapıyorlar, basically. So we move on to the second person plural, and we don't start from scratch. We just keep our derivation going where we left off. So participant feature fails to lexicalize every step of the way because we have no entries ending in it, and we have no entries that are like 2P, 3P, PLP. So we're going to have to backtrack and try the next step that allows us to lexicalize 3P, but that also fails. So we have to backtrack again until number. And what we did to lexicalize number was to evacuate init P. So we try the next step, which is to evacuate the mother node of init P. and this is able to lexicalize, we get yapıyorsun. We're on the right track. It seems like we're on the right track, but you'll see that we'll hit the same wall. Oops. We'll hit the same wall again with the we can't lexicalize 2p once again. So we'll have to backtrack again until number. Evacuate the whole structure this time, and we'll arrive at yapıyorsunuz. Now this is right. So we keep going. We lexicalize PLP, person feature, and the participant features by evacuating the grandmother node of init P, and we arrive at yapıyorsunuz. So you'll remember that this is the node at the very right, the constituent, was a subtree of ULF. Soon lexicalizes TP, and we have yapıyor. So that was successful. We have yapıyorsunuz, the second person plural, no problem. And we keep going to get yapıyoruz. How do we get yapıyoruz? We try to merge 1p and try to lexicalize. It doesn't work. So we evacuate init p and then try to lexicalize. Also doesn't work. There's nothing that looks like this. So we evacuate the mother node of init p, and then when we try to lexicalize, you'll see that we get the big tree that you saw earlier for ULF on the very right. So that was Suno's earlier, but when we evacuated yapıyor, and it will look like that, and it will turn into ULF. So that was the plurals derived. And my conclusion is that Turkish Z paradigm affixes seem to contain tense feature in their syntactic structure. The Z paradigm suffix for the second person plural is able to be decomposed syntactically into two smaller units, namely sın and uz, both of which are also attested affixes within the paradigm. And the logic behind the decomposition, I think, could be applied to the K paradigm as well in future studies. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for your proposal. I have to know how useful it is to invent houses to the trees of, for example, walls that inform the you have differences in place of house marking and like your Pajakum versus your pajama. And also you see that line and it is totally the same. Your pajama versus your pajama.
Yeah, thank you for your question. That really presents us with an interesting question. I think this is also a factor that we should consider when we're trying to derive. This is obviously just standard Turkish, but yapacağım, for example, brings into question n is a suffix included in the K paradigm. I also thought about that. I don't know how to introduce social relations into the syntactic framework, but that's an interesting question, yes. Thank you. Hi.
Thank you. I'm a little bit unfamiliar with this. What's the justification?
A separate number. Plural is the more marked feature we have. So anything that's non-plural will be missing the plural feature. So as Cortiula puts it, the feature is a little primitive. The absence of a feature indicates another meaning. So you don't have, for example, with the tense feature, you didn't see here, but if you were conjugating, not conjugating, but if you were deriving in the past tense, we will also have an additional past tense feature on top of TP because we seem to categorize tenses into non-past and past tenses. So I think the distinction here with the plural and the number features are also similar. You would have, for example, the plural feature would be missing with singular entries, for example. Thank you. Well, I'm not too familiar, but the Freudian verbs analyzed by Cortula have the additive feature on top of, was it on top of plural? I don't remember, but I think that is it's possible to incorporate other features into the FSEC if needed, I think. It's not really set in stone yet. I think for those languages, it is possible to introduce new features. Mm-hmm. Thank you. I thank you. Thank you.
Next up, we have a talk titled Agent Preference in Children, the Role of Animacy and Event Coherence by Ceren Barış and Ercanur Ünal.
Hello, everyone. Today I will present our study titled Agent Preference in Children, the Role of Animacy and Event Coherence. Sorry for the typo there. I will start by giving some background on the topic. We divide our continuous experience into events, and these events are made up of a set of participants, activities, and outcomes that are bound together by causal interrelatedness. For example, tickling is an example of an event with two participants. And these event participants are studied under thematic roles in linguistics. These roles capture the relationship between a verb and its arguments. For example, in the sentence, the woman tickled the man, the woman is the agent, while the man is the patient. And agent is defined as the causer of an action, while the patient is the entity affected by this action. According to a linguistic theory titled the thematic hierarchy, these roles are organized hierarchically, and agents are the most prominent role, followed by patients, then goals and recipients, then sources, and finally instruments. And specifically, agents and patients are the key roles of an event. And when we look at the frequency and order of mention studies, we can see that agents and patients are mentioned more frequently, and they're encoded in more central syntactic positions like subject and object respectively. And when we look at languages that have a dominant word order, the agent or the subject is mentioned before the patient or the object. And when we look at the most common word orders, as you can see, the subject always comes before the object. Even though the thematic hierarchy was formulated to explain the linguistic representations of the thematic roles, it's assumed that it has roots in cognition as event participants. So it makes sense that we would see this hierarchy in cognition as well. And recent research with adults actually supports this. We see that agents are identified with higher accuracy and faster compared to patients. Agents are also detected faster, for example, in a visual search task. And lastly, agents have more predictive potential about the upcoming event compared to patients. And when we look at the developmental evidence, we see that infants have some understanding of agent-patient roles. In older studies, infants as young as 7 months old dishabituate when the roles of agent and patient are reversed. And we also see this role switch cost in a recent study using a pupil dilation measurement as well. So we can say that infants are sensitive to the relational structure of event participants from a young age. However, studies directly investigating the differences in prominence is limited. One study used a change detection paradigm with 3 to 5-year-old Turkish and English-speaking children. This study had relatively complex events with 4 participants. They had human agents, and they had inanimate objects as patients, goals, and instruments. And the results were mostly in line with the thematic hierarchy. The children were more accurate at detecting the changes to patients and goals compared to instruments. However, the accuracy for agents could not be compared to the other participants because of the differences in animacy as well as the nature of the color change. As I mentioned, agents were animate while the other participants were not. And also agents' clothing color changed while the whole object changed color for the other participants. So even though the study provides some insights into the thematic hierarchy in cognition among children, these remain as limitations of the study. When we look at what drives these asymmetries, we see that animacy could be a possible factor. Agents are usually animate, such as humans or animals. However, this is not the case for patients. And when we look at natural events, our attention is automatically drawn to animate agents compared to inanimate objects. And in some of the studies I mentioned, the agents were animate while the patients were inanimate. So this is a real concern. And the second issue is the nature of color change. As I mentioned, changing the color of a whole entity versus one part of an entity might not be conceptual counterparts. And lastly, there may be other low-level features that may play a role in this agent prominence. And the best way to keep the low-level features the same is disrupting event coherence by using back-to-back versions of the events as controls. So in the present study, we asked whether preschool-age children show a higher relative salience of agents compared to patients. We also asked whether animacy and event coherence plays a role in this preference. We recruited 33 3 to 5-year-old Turkish-speaking children, and we conducted the study face-to-face in their kindergartens. To manipulate, for the change detection task, we created images with 2 participants. Yes. So here's an original image with the agent and the patient. And to manipulate the changing role, we manipulated the pictures by modifying the t-shirt color of either the agent or the patient. Then we also manipulated patient animacy. In half of the stimuli, the patient was an animate entity, an adult human. And in the other half, it was an inanimate object, such as these boxes here. We cannot see the original image, but this is a color-modified version for the agent, and this is a color-modified version for the patient. And lastly, we also manipulated event coherence. As I mentioned, we had face-to-face images with a coherent event and 2 participants. And then we created back-to-back versions by taking the vertically symmetrical image of each participant. And we did these for both the animate patient and inanimate patient stimuli. So we adapted the change detection paradigm of Rensink and colleagues. Each trial began with a fixation cross. Then the original and color-modified images flickered back and forth with a gray mask in between them. And this sequence was looped 7 times, and we determined this based on a pilot study. We aimed for enough loops so that children can detect the changes, but they don't get bored. And here I have an example of a trial, but the GIF is not working, so sorry for that. And at the end of each trial, we asked participants on which side the color change was, and they responded by raising either their right hand or their left hand. And we also recorded their eye movements throughout the study. So we hypothesized that we would see a higher relative salience of agents in events with an inanimate patient, but that this asymmetry would diminish or disappear in events with an animate patient. And we expected to see this as higher accuracy for agents, as well as different time course of fixation proportions to agents and patients. And for back-to-back events, since the only difference is the presence of event roles, and the low-level features are the same, we expected to see no difference between agents and patients. When we look at the results for accuracy, in face-to-face events, we saw that there was a difference between agents and patients in the inanimate patient condition. In this condition, the children they were more accurate at detecting changes to agents compared to patients. However, there was no difference between agents and patients in the animate patient condition. When we look at the back-to-back events, there was no difference between agents and patients in either condition. So children were equally accurate at detecting changes to agents as well as patients, regardless of patient animacy. Then we analyzed the eye gaze results. For face-to-face events, we discovered that participants fixated more on patients compared to agents, again, regardless of patient animacy. Moving on. However, when we look at back-to-back results, again, there was no difference between agents and patients, regardless of patient animacy. So to sum up, children were more accurate at detecting changes to agents, but only in face-to-face events with an inanimate patient. However, on the other hand, children had more target fixations toward patients, so they needed more time to process, to accurately detect the changes to them. We believe that this provides a more temporally precise measurement for children, since reaction time is not reliable when used with children. And compared to accuracy, eye gaze data gives us information about the process behind the decision, not just the decision itself. And when we conducted the study with adults, we saw that they had higher proportion of fixations towards patients compared to agents, just like children. And this is in line with reaction time results. So they had higher reaction times for patients and higher proportion of fixations towards patients. So we believe that this eye gaze data, the proportion of fixations specifically, provides a new reliable measurement for children as well as adults. So as you may have noticed, there's a little discrepancy between accuracy and eye gaze results. In accuracy, agents were more prominent than inanimate patients, but for eye gaze data, agents were more prominent than patients. And we believe that this may be reflecting the fact that in the earlier stages of processing, animacy is not a strong indicator of agency. However, with experience, this link probably strengthens and NMC signals agency. So when we look at what drives these asymmetries, we see that NMC cannot be the only explanation, because if it was due to NMC alone, we would also see a difference in back-to-back events. However, this is not the case. Again, when we look at low-level visual features, they would also show a difference in back-to-back events. So we can say that event roles must be involved in this prominence somehow. However, as you can tell, there was a difference in accuracy between agents and inanimate patients only, and not animate patients. So we believe that an interaction between event roles and animacy shapes attentional priorities in this case. So our results align with the thematic hierarchy predictions for agents and patients, with the addition of a modulation by animacy. Our results also support an influential proposal on language development, which emphasizes the importance of learning the connection between words and event structure. And studies show that 2-year-old children can resolve ambiguous pronouns by favoring subjects over objects as reference. And this might be reflecting the agent prominence that is observed in our study. So for future directions, comparison with younger and older ages can help us shed light onto the effects of animacy, specifically on the link between animacy and agency. And in our study, we manipulated patient animacy only, and we did so because inanimate agents are rare in everyday life. But manipulating agent animacy can help us understand whether agent animacy plays a role in event role prominence. And another interesting idea could be investigating social events. Being social, these events wouldn't include a patient, but an experiencer. And the levels of animacy can be manipulated to see how it plays a role in the prominence of event roles. So that is all. Thank you very much for listening.
Do we have any questions? Well, wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I think I have a question. So, I'm going back to the results for the, and then you might want to go to the, the incoherent. Back to that.
Oh, wait, the results? So this one?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I was curious. It looks like all conditions for back to back were more accurate than the inanimate patient. I was wondering if you had any sort of hypothesis.
Thank you for the question. That's a good one that I hadn't thought much about. But now that I think about it, it might have something to do with the fact that when there's a coherent event, there's something social. So that might be a little more complicated than just two entities. So that might have affected the accuracy results. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Maybe I missed this part if I'm so sorry, but when you were doing the face-to-face part, were you also showing the images or like the videos, or was it an actual situation?
No, we just showed them images on a computer screen that were flashing. And at the end, we asked them to tell us the color change side.
And also like asking about it, experimenting and asking the children like what's going on, and then analyze the sentence structures, maybe with that. younger children?
Thank you for the question. There are some studies with the act-out paradigm, but they were looking how the roles were perceived in language. But when we ask children to act the events, that might change the perspective, like a sense of agency might come into play, and that might tell us something different. I'm unable to comment on what would happen, but I think that would be something different than what we're doing by studying how they perceive agency, but not how they're sensing the agency, I want to say. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Sure. So here, for the back-to-back events, the only difference is the absence of an event and therefore event roles. So in this picture here, this woman is not the agent, technically. I just called them agents for ease of reference. So if we saw a difference in the back-to-back events as well, we could say that it was based on something other than event roles. For example, animacy or other low-level features such as either complexity or color or body postures maybe. But we use back-to-back events as controls to kind of dispute that. Thank you.
Again, the concept of
Mhm. Yeah.
was something different for adults or
No, as far as I know, it goes the same way for adults. But what's interesting is that children as young as 2 years old can also do this. So, yeah. Thank you.
Is there anything? iPhone. Okay, that's the last one. That was our last talk. Thank you very much again. I would like to once again thank you for the committee, our faculty, all the presenters, and all the audience members. I will now give the floor to Dr. Yusuf from the Department of Linguistics and Forensics. Organizing committee and the volunteers. If you don't mind coming to stage so that everyone can see you and give you a clap. Please don't be shy. Come on. To the stage. You too. You'll need someone to take a picture of this. Thank you, guys. You can read and do smoothly, and it's a lot of work. So, thank you so much. Thank you. We are grateful to the invited speakers, Espina Hoca, Cem Hoca, and all the other oral presentations and poster presentations that we uploaded them to. There is a lot of background work which was actually shared by all the faculty members in the linguistics department, Ömer Hoca, Metin Hoca, Balkis Hoca, Ümit Hoca, and all the others. I'd like to also thank my colleagues for all their hard work. What else? Oh, we are grateful to Language Center for their support. Their support is very valuable for us. We thank them a lot. And also everyone for coming and listening to the talks. I hope you enjoyed them as much as I did. And also those people who are traveling from like other universities and other cities, we are really grateful. Thank you for coming and spread the word. So we'd like to have more audience from other universities in becoming a really great student conference. And we'd like to keep it that way, improve it in the upcoming years. Did I forget anyone?
Oh, thank you, thank you. I didn't know much. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. So then this officially closes the conference. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you. Okay, yeah.
Please come to the stage.
Sonsuza kadar sürecek herhalde.
Güle güle.